Hello, everyone. How are we doing today? Let's see. We have Stafford Thompson. Hello, Stafford. Take care of best wishes. Had to take an early lunch. I'm looking forward to catching up this evening. Oh, well. Hope work goes well and hope you had at least a nice early lunch. Carl Gasword. Hello. Albazaski. Hello. John Shea. Hello. Ian Carr. Hello. Are we there yet? Well, I'm starting at 6 o'clock on the dot, I think. So it worked perfectly. Hi, Dan Freeman. I'm not sure if she would end up sinking a CSS Virginia, mainly because, well, I'll get into it. Hello, RAF4. Hello, DGV40. Hello, Aviator Enterprise. Paul from Chicago. Can't say long, but ahoy, ahoy. Hello, Paul. Hello, Paul Respect. Good news day today. It is an interesting day today. We've heard about the Type 32 frigates, which are going to be the Type 31s, slightly moved on. It's interesting enough, it looks like we could be ending up with that frigate factory finally being gone, because there's also plans for the Type 32s to evolve into the Type 33s, potentially an air defense frigate that will eventually take over from the Type 45. So there's all sorts of interesting ideas going out. Let's see what actually gets delivered, shall we? But it is good news, hopefully, for everyone. Hello, Vision. Warriors Deep Draft would have gotten her stuck in the mud like US and Minnesota. US water was very shallow at the time before dredging. The thinking is, and this is my point I'm going to make, is we'll get into this one. If Warrior fights the Monitor, at what point do you think the Warrior is going to get close enough inshore to deal with the Monitor? It's a case of it all depends on where the fight takes place. That one, but we'll get into that. And I have got a recorded video, but that's not going to come out till after this. Evening, Buccaneer. Mm-hmm. Ooh. Ian Carr, Maiden Voyage, Rachel's Warrior, and Black Prince. Well, hello, everyone. Jeff Beeler, afternoon. That reminds me, Jeff. I'll quickly send you a message on Discord because someone's been trying to get hold of you, and they sent me a message going, "Is Jeff still responding?" Right, so I'll quickly send the message while I remember it, as we are starting quite early for us. Done. Right then, let's see. Paul from Chicago, as much as I enjoy trolling Brits about everyone who shared USS President prize money, the British should have pushed the 1862 USN to the ground and called them definitely. Dan Freeman, I worry about the Type 34. There will be a pawn. Austin Harmon, any update on the Type 31's class name? No, but I'm still holding out hope for the RF users. Hello, DM Carpenter. Jeff Peeler, what was the good news this morning? $16.5 billion over 4 years for British defence added on to the current budget. Zachary Gherkin, good evening, sir. New IKB 4002. If Adris Moria rammed the US Monitor, would she sink the cheese board on raft? I don't think they'd want to ram her, because if they did, that would cause a lot of damage to the helm. Vision. No monitors at the time of Trent Affair, if I recall correctly. RN has the advantage in a short, sharp intervention in favour of the South. Monitors built as much for the Terrence as fight the South. Monitors are built as basically extended coastal batteries. Buccaneer. It's too early for them. Hello, shoot me. Arson Harmon. Also, if you have to pay $40 for another small pack of Iron Brew, I'm literally just going to start an embroideration cover. $40 for a small pack of Iron Brew? Ouch! Ouch! Seriously? Even with the sugar tax, it's not that much. Pebbleside, good evening. Good evening. Dan Freeman, I am not getting into your whole Type 34 discussion. I'm just avoiding that for point of view that it will just cause more fun. Dan Freeman, 2-litre bottles of Iron Brew, £1.20 in savings at the moment. Yes, and I know what a place where you can get a 2-litre bottle of Iron Brew for 50p as well. So, trouble is that's down in Cornwall. Strange enough. So, tonight's discussion is the Trent Affair, and it's a lot of fun, the Trent Affair, because it causes a whole mountain of what-ifs to be viable and possible. So, this is, of course, as always, one of the patron ones, and it's courtesy of the CIA. Ouch, Austin Harmon. Ouch, that's just expensive. So, the Trent Affair, the whole point about the Trent Affair is when it takes place. Okay? There are lots of discussions about what might have happened in a theoretical war with the British getting involved in the American Civil War. There are lots of potentials for it. But it's rather interesting that, how do I put it? My discussion yesterday was about Norway 1940, which of course includes the Altmark incident. I have done lots of discussions about the Asmar incident and Tsingtao 1939 on previous videos and previous discussions. Tomorrow's is the Battle of Quiberon Bay. Now, the Battle of Quiberon Bay is going to be kind of unusual for the entire week in that it's not looking at these whole diplomatic snafus where there are all sorts of things going that could go either way. But interesting enough, the Battle of Quiberon Bay actually does end up with some diplomatic issues. All these events have been issues where technically international law has been broken by everyone. Because depending on which aspect of the law you're looking at, you're legal, you're illegal. That's the joy of having a law system based on precedent. It can always be rewritten. Austin Hammond, quick mental arithmetic about cost of fuel to drive to Cornwall to make saving over costing. Worth it for you to go down there about weekly there? Possibly. Possibly. Austin, I'm high and dry desert yank about to be frozen over due to winter. Good luck. Good luck with that one. Dean Carter, I found Iron Brew in Shoeless Ford, North Carolina. $1.99 for a half-liter bottle. Yowza? Oh. Vision. Monitor's not much good at bombarding Confederate forts compared to broadside batteries. It's all going to be fun. And Derp Squad, guten Tag to you too. Right, so, the background. So, you can, of course, start off a background of just the US Civil War, but you can't really. There's also the Oregon boundary dispute, and that's a rather fun thing going on. Now, the fun thing about the Oregon boundary dispute is, of course, it gets decided by the Kaiser, which is always lovely. You know, they go to the Kaiser Wilhelm. Well, one of the Kaiser. I think it's the first, not the second. So they go to the Kaiser to sort it out, and he decides in the American favor, but in the American favor, he goes to the 49th parallel, which is, to an extent, it means that what exists in terms of the reason the US border and the US-Canadian border is like it is because of this dispute, because of the agreements in it, and because of what happens. But also, it creates a lot of fun with the San Juan Islands and various other fun issues. In 1858 and later than that, so leading up to 61. And at this point, there is also going around the world a guy called Sir Geoffrey Hornby, who was involved in the Pig War, and at this point is in charge in 1861, is the flag captain to the Commander-in-Chief Channel Squadron. Flag captain in the Mediterranean Fleet, to the Commander-in-Chief Mediterranean Fleet on aboard HMS Neptune, which is a first-rate ship of the line with 120 guns that does actually have screw propulsion, and so can make it across the ocean quite happily. Now, why am I bringing up this? Because the Royal Navy has a huge number of ships, which are first rates and all the other things, which have been fitted with screw propulsion. Now, I am not one of those ones who's going to sit and go, therefore the Royal Navy will just easily walk the path. They won't. They won't walk over anything. But you have to remember there is quite a large number of very experienced, very skilled in the Royal Naval officers. The Royal Navy has a large pool of ships already in existence. And this is, again, it's 1861. It's not further on in the war. It's not after the US has managed to do their massive build-up. Aviator Enterprise. Definitely an example of the popcorn kettle black. If the shoe was on their foot, the RN would have done exactly the same thing. HMS Liverpool, Asamamaru incident. So, there is a dispute. It's been settled, but that means there are actually quite a lot of British ships and some quite armed, quite experienced officers sitting on the Pacific coast of America. Okay? That is a problem for the US in any war, because if you consider the American Civil War, everything is concentrated the Atlantic side, really, of the war, and it's really starts to concentrate on. If you have stuff fighting over there, that then causes problems for the US. You also have this, and this is the point I make whenever I hear historians debating this and getting involved. Okay, so in 1861, by the end of December 1861, 35 battles have taken place. Confederates had won 15, 7 had been inconclusive, including some which had been rained out, and 13 had been won by Union forces. The first Battle of Bull Run is the really big one in terms of 1861, in terms of what's heard about it. And yeah, that was won by the Confederates. And also, you must remember, the McClellan is still considered a good general at this point. And a gentleman called Lieutenant David Porter, who's sent by the US Navy to look at the Royal Navy at this point, and who sends a message back to a former lieutenant, the USN, a good friend, who has the coolest name of all Lincoln's government ministers and cabinet secretaries. Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Gustavus Fox. I went on board a small English screw sloop the other day, the Jason, 1859, and with her one Armstrong gun, which some folks say is a failure, but I say it's not, she would whip the largest ship in the Navy out of her boots, or more properly speaking, her pumps, as ships don't wear boots. The point-blank range of this Armstrong gun is 1.5 miles, which settles the question, for none of our guns will more than reach that with the greatest elevation. Okay. So the background at the moment to Trent Affair is US Navy is really not as strong as it will become. The US Army has just been through the first Battle of the Bull Run and is rebuilding itself after that. There are some officers who are doing excellent work, but they are unfortunately few and far between. The Confederates are actually managing to win at the moment because they haven't yet gone through their logistics and supplies. The US are starting to enforce the Anaconda Plan, but not quite getting there. And the British have a dispute which they wouldn't mind changing the outcome of. And the British also have a navy which is quite large, quite capable. It couldn't do the things the same way they done in the War of 1812, but that doesn't mean they couldn't do them. So, that's the background. Right. Ian Carr, can Monitor be tempted out of shallows with complimentary iron brew? I doubt it, but there are other ways. Vision, just watch video on Point Roberts, Washington State. COVID border closure Canada has cut them off from both Canada and USA by land. No ferry to rest USA. 1,500 people live there year-round. Yikes. Death Squad, that's a clock. You're right. The Royal Navy wouldn't walk over anything. They would sail over it. Oh. Yogi Khan, hello. So, it's a fun thing that's going on. It always is fun. So the actual Trent Affair event is actually rather prosaic. And when I say it's rather prosaic, it involves a guy called Captain Charles Wilkes, who is one of the most interesting random characters the US Navy has, and Lieutenant Fairfax. Now, how do I put this politely? The whole issue with what happens is most importantly due to the Trent being a mail steamer. Now, by mail steamer, I mean MAIL. And as anyone who's ever looked at their various acts of law in their country interfering with the Queen's mail or the Federal Mail or all these things has some pretty heavy penalties. So, that creates a problem. On top of that, and this is an issue which you cannot undervalue, this is a British flagship. It might not be a warship, but as a mail steamer, it carries British diplomatic papers and carries British diplomatic documents in a diplomatic bag. It also carries the British mail. All these things are things which are very much British flagged property. i.e. under diplomatic convention, interfering with them creates a tremendous amount of trouble. Now, interesting enough, the Confederate commissioners, they had been trying to get out of Confederacy for quite a while. Their idea first had been to try and use one of the largest steamships they have available. But, interesting enough, the Confederacy couldn't really get it out because of the Union blockade. They had these ships, but they couldn't use them because of the blockade. And they end up being able to get a smaller ship thanks to a slave owner, but also one of the larger merchants, businessmen of the period in Charleston, basically hiring a ship for them. And here's the interesting thing. The ship actually makes it. It makes it to the Caribbean. It makes it to the island. It drops off the commissioners and, in the case of their secretaries and their in the case of one of their family, and actually makes it back. So the Americans failed to intercept them in the Confederate ship. If they had intercepted on the Confederate ship, everything would have been easy. Straightforward. Fine. And the lovely Wilkes pulls into a harbor. He's technically hunting the CSS Sumter, but yeah. Frankly, he's just wandering wherever he feels like. He has got all sorts of orders that he's not paying attention to. And so he is down there. He hears about them. He hears they're going to be on a British steamer. He realizes that British steamer has to dock at one other place before it can head home because it's a mail steamer, so it has to go a certain route. Which means to leave Havana, it has to go to leave where it is in Havana. It has to go from one particular route. It has to go through one channel because the rest aren't deep enough for it to get there. And so he waits. And he spots her. He fires a warning shot. She doesn't take any notice. She carries on. She's a British flagged mail steamer. She makes sure the Union Jack is seen. They fire a second shot. She stops. And at that point, Wilkes sends for Fairfax. Fairfax and he have already had a discussion about the legal problems and legal ramifications of this. The thing is, what both will do is actually interesting here, because Wilkes requests and instructions to Fairfax, which if I expand it you can read, are that on boarding her, you will demand the papers of the steamer, her clearance from Havana, with the list of passengers and crew. Should Mr. Mason, Mr. Silver, Miss Eustace, and McFarland be on board, make them prisoners and send them to board the ship and take possession of her as a prize. This must be brought on. All trunks, cases, packages, and bags belonging to them you will take possession of and send on board the ship. Any dispatches found on the persons of the prisoners or in possession of those on board the steamer will be taken of possession of, examined, and retained if necessary. Now there's a problem there. Point one is a bit of an issue. You're not supposed to do that. Point two, you can just about get away with, as long as you take her to a prize court immediately, and it's a recognized prize court, and accept whatever judgment the prize court gives you. And that's usually the precedence which the British follow when they're doing it. Point three. You see, the moment he expands point three to all papers and everything on board, that means he will be interfering with the British government documents aboard that ship. That is a straight up act of war. That is violating diplomatic norms. That is illegal under all sorts of traditions and diplomatic rules and things, which you don't do. Because if you do, then other people can do it to you. So you don't do it. The moment he gives that order, he has turned what is definitely a very complicated situation, considering just fired on a British ship. So it could be argued to be an act of war anyway, into a definite act of war if Fairfax does it. Vision. Crimean War gunboats, which were built in large numbers, will be very useful in a war. Combined with sloops and corvettes, could take several US seaports, as the Union Navy took southern ones one by one. Potentially, but don't worry. I think those gunboats would have ended up on the Great Lakes, as Jeff Beeler says. Thank you, Jeff, for doing that email. Now, Fairfax goes aboard, and Fairfax first tries to leave his prize crew, his armed persons, off the ship. And they gets into a bit of a fight because Captain Moyer will not produce the documents, won't do them. But the two Confederate emissaries and their secretaries come forward. But here's the thing: there is a Royal Navy commander aboard who is so outraged at this violation of the British flag, this violation of international law, that actually they hand over their papers to him and he hides the papers. Fairfax decides not to try and search the ship or anything like that and doesn't take it as prize, and actually just takes them prisoners off the ship and takes them back to the San Jacinto. And this is going to sound strange, but okay, yes, he hasn't gone and searched the British papers, so he hasn't done that as act of war, but he's now created a problem. Because, as the British legal advice, which had actually been got before even the Trent Affair happens, and by the way, it goes Fairfax, Seward, in terms of left to right, Fairfax, Seward, Wilkes. United States man of war, following in with the British mail steamer, this was an example used in hypotheticals submitted by the Cabinet, beyond the territorial limits of the United Kingdom, might cause her to bring to, might board her, examine her papers, open the general mail bags, not the government mail bags, and examine the contents thereof without, however, opening any mail bag or packet addressed to any officer or department of Her Majesty's government. The United States ships of war may put a prize crew on board the West India steamer and carry off to the port of the United States for adjudication by a prize court there, but she would have no right to move Messrs. Mason and Seidel and carry them off as prisoners, leaving the ship to pursue her voyage. And therefore, illegal. And when they're looking at this actual event, it's considered illegal, unjustifiable in international law. The San Jacinto assumed to act as a belligerent, but the Trent was not captured or carried into port of the United States for adjudication as a prize, and under the circumstance cannot be considered as having acted in breach of international law. It follows that from on board a merchant ship of a neutral power, pursuing a lawful and innocent voyage, certain individuals have been taken by force. Her Majesty's government will therefore, in our opinion, be justified in requiring reparation for the international wrong which has been on this occasion committed. Here's the great thing. If Fairfax had done what Wilkes had told him to, he would have committed he would have broken international law and committed an act of war. But also because, he used the justification that they didn't have enough personnel to both crew the Trent and the San Jacinto, that if they did that, so they had to let her go, because they let her go and didn't take her to a prize court, that was also illegal. Now, here's the thing. this takes a while for the Americans to really realize what's happened, because when they first get the news of the capture of them, they are happy. Yes, we've captured the envoys. Yes, we've shown how big and how brilliant we are. Yes, da 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 da. But slowly it starts to dawn on them. The British might not roll over. The British get a bit funny about things happening at sea to their ships. The British are sending troops to Canada. And Seward, who had been so happy about the idea of a foreign power, starting a war on a foreign power, especially Britain, because he felt it would get the Confederates to come back on side to fight against the external power, suddenly realized that the Confederates plus an external power would not be a good scenario for the Union. And that is the thing you'll be facing, because the British are very pragmatic. They don't like slavery. They don't like the Confederacy on those grounds, and there are various other grounds they don't like the Confederacy. But if you are starting to do this one and aren't going to start apologizing and return the passages and make up for what you just did wrong, then the British are going to get very, very annoyed with you. They don't want a war, but they're also not that prepared to back down. And slowly the Americans start to realize that what Wilkes did was not legal. In fact, not only was it not legal, when you have someone like Napoleon III lecturing the US, United Union, on how to act international relations, and basically stating that if Britain goes to war, he'll be backing up Britain. There are various ministers in Lincoln's government who are going, yikes! This is not good. Now, Jacinto. Yeah, Jacinto. Sorry, I keep pronouncing Jacinto wrong. Jacinto. I thought the Secretary of State was saying pronounced as Seward. I was Seward, but I could be getting it wrong. Hello, Greg Sadowski. Seward. So, what does this lead us to? Well, it leads us to the traditional thing. So what happens if it doesn't go? It doesn't get sorted out. If the Americans, well, basically the Union ends up handing back over their prizes to the British and sending, whilst not doing a massive formal apologies, doing lots of informal apologies and sending as many. Basically, it's very good that General Scott turns up in Europe when he does, because he basically becomes Lincoln's mouthpiece in Europe, and he's stopping. He's dealing with some of the problems that are coming across from the United States and from the Union ministers. It's a fun times for them all. Now, let's start to think about the potential combatants. The potential combatants in any war are usually stated as being HMS Warrior versus USS Monitor. There is a small problem with that. Warrior was actually commissioned 3 months prior to the Trent Affair, went straight into the Channel Squadron, and is a rather capable ship. But before we get that, we're going to get into debate on Seward, apparently, which is quite good. So Seward is a very good politician, but he comes into Lincoln's cabinet thinking 3 things. One, that he's going to be telling Lincoln what to do. It takes him a couple of months to realize that that isn't the way Lincoln runs things. 2, that he is smarter than everyone in the world when he isn't. And 3, that Everything, all the internal crises in America can be solved by a nice external war. And that Britain is a good example of this. As Vision has just pointed out, Lincoln says one war at a time. Very quickly, once Lincoln realizes that the British... The thing is, at the beginning, when it first happens, people don't think that it is going to be what it is going to be. It's only when they realize that it was a mail steamer. First points, the various first reports, especially from Wilkes, do not really highlight, in fact, in extent bury, that Trent had been the mail steamer, and she was actually RMS Trent, i.e. Royal Mail Steamer Trent, i.e. not a ship you should be doing this to. Jeff Beale just pointed out, it is interesting, British India was the only source of saltpeter used in Union gunpowder. There are a few other sources, but yes. Basically, war with Britain is not good for various reasons for the Union. If the supplies from around the world stop coming into the Union, their industry will grind to a halt. Especially as they're trying to move manpower from the industries which provide the raw materials to the fighting. The fact is that as the Trent Affair starts up, the British very quickly mobilise nearly 30,000 soldiers to go to Canada. Think about that. It's not a massive army in terms of the American Civil War, but it's suddenly quite a significant force sitting up to the north, away from all the Confederate armies. If you have to fight that as well as the Confederate armies, you have a problem. If the Confederates suddenly get supplies, you have a problem. And this is where this comes in. HMS Warrior. Not far off 10,000 tons. In fact, 9,284 tons. She's been in commissioned service for 3 months prior to the Trent Affair. She has a length of about 420 feet, and honestly, despite having a far larger beam, is roughly the size of a 1912 Arethusa class cruiser, but far heavier and far more densely built. This is why basically, I often talk about cruiser versus battleship subdivision, and how a battleship will have far greater subdivision. So technically, she is a Warrior class armored frigate. But she has bulkheads which are the same thickness and made out of the same composition of material as her armor belt. So she's very, very solidly built. She also has a full sailing rig, which gives her a very, very long range if she wants it. And a top speed of 14 knots with her steam engines. And they also have a range of 2,100 nautical miles on the fuel carried. Although that's at 11 knots, not 16 knots. So she's fast. 26 smoothbore muzzle loading, roughly 8-inch guns. Yes, they are fitted broadside. They're not fitted in turrets, but they can move slightly within that broadside. They can be angled. They can go up and down, elevated, and all these as they need to be. Yeah. And she's got a lot of crew. She's got 706 officers and ratings. So it's a lot of personnel. And she has a sister coming up quite quickly. It's not a good scenario to try and fight HMS Warrior if you are the Union forces at this time. Because, yes, you are building ships. as quickly as you can. But the monitor's not going to come into service till February 1862. And let's say war starts in December 1861 or January 1862. You could probably commission her and upgrade her more quickly. But the thing is, where is the warrior going to be versus where is she going to be? That's the first contest. That's the first thing you have to think about. Where is HMS Warrior going to turn up versus where is the US Monitor going to be? And US Monitor has a far smaller crew, far slower, not fully rigged, not real, and it's a coastal monitor. Please also remember that. The US Monitor is a coastal monitor. She's a very good example of a coastal monitor, but there is a reason when she goes out into the sea to do a transit, she gets sunk. She's a coastal monitor. Hello, Frederico Vego. Measure Oates. Gee, why does Seward's attitude sound somewhat familiar? I know. History doesn't repeat, but by goodness, the things run close to it sometimes. Hello, Captain Seabuff. Pretty hard to fight a war if you just declared war on your supply of ammo. Yeah. That and a few other things. Dan Freeman, isn't Britain being fed by North America grain at this point? Not so much. There's grain coming from Canada. There's also other things coming from around the world. And remember, there are always people who are willing to step up to supply the nation which can get it there. Egyptian grain, anyone? Hello, Constant Drowsiness. Who's P? When I visit HMS Warrior, the guy there claimed that the removable screw was usually not removed because it didn't work well. Yeah, it doesn't really work well to remove it. Vision. UK was dependent on King Cotton, King Corn in the United States Midwest states, which trumped King Cotton from the South, making both nations very dependent on each other in trade. Not as much as King Corn is often stated by American historians and some British historians on the subject and others. But how do I put this politely? Okay. So, when this is happening, the autumn harvests have already happened. So Britain is at the high point of its food storage. And yes, it's in the winter, but the growing months are ahead and the food cycle is coming. So you have to remember there are other food sources. So by the time it would come around again to be harvesting the corn and getting the corn, there could well have been other food sources. And it all depends on how long the war goes, but Britain could have found other places to get food. That is the thing about... see, the whole point is Britain could stop the supplies getting to America by stopping off the trade using a distant blockade, using ships like the Warrior. But America couldn't stop the supplies getting Britain because they don't have the large enough navy to start imposing a blockade of any kind on Britain. So that is your basic problem with the idea of that balancing out. There are other reasons as well, which we'll get into in a bit. Jeff Beeler. Some gunboats were small enough to use the existing canal system to get to the Great Lakes. St. Lawrence canals were just big enough, but they might have had to fight their way forward. I'm sure they would have had to, but again, the British were actually starting to send them out and get them out there before the war, whilst diplomatic events were still going on. Death Squad. If I remember right, the armored citadel of HMS Warrior was designed to float, even if the rest of the ship had been blown away. Again, that is to an extent true. Vision. Union captured a lot of southern cotton plantations pretty early on in the war. Yeah. Jeff Beeler. Railways from Montreal and Quebec City, but not St. John and Halifax at this time. No well-organized Canadian militia at this time causes the origin of the modern Canadian Army. Yes, it does. It's part of the reforms. The British really do get pushing on the Canadian Armed Forces at this point. Dan Freeman, I have visions of the US Union government trying to see if France will sell Glar. At this point, the argument is that actually Glar could have ended up on side of the British. And so, here is the thing, the what might have been. Monitor versus Warrior. Here is the thing. If the Warrior is caught in an undefended port and Monitor managed to sneak up on it, let's say in the middle of the night, not at dawn, it won't sneak up on it at dawn. The Royal Navy's at full alert every morning and every evening, so you have to be in dead of night. And there are no patrol boats and nothing out to alert at the Monitor's presence. The Monitor could well win if they can get in some early shots and raking. If they confront each other in open water, let's say with Warrior escorting a convoy into New Orleans or somewhere like that, then frankly, I think the Monitor would have probably been blasted before she got close, because Warrior can just outsail her. She's a lot faster. And whilst the Monitor is more maneuverable, the Monitor cannot really keep up with her. As long as the Warrior can keep her guns pointing towards her. And yeah, I don't... honestly, if the waters get choppy enough around the Monitor or deep enough, I do not see the Monitor doing well at the sea at all. In fact, I think, honestly, Monitor probably gets sunk by the sea before she manages to confront HMS Warrior. I think that is your ultimate thing. I think the Americans, US Navy would end up having to sort of build ironclads of the line of Warrior. I wouldn't be surprised if you see ironclads in terms of what we think of as the pre-dreadnought battleships and the pre-dreadnought cruisers, that sort of design of an ironclad sort of hull, steam engines, and turreted guns appearing on a sea-going hull, because the British end up producing a very interesting Monitor again for sea defense. But it doesn't mean that they're sort of going to keep their... how do I put this politely and sensibly? I think what would happen would be a very rapid evolution, but the British have got an advantage in that they've got more shipyards. Those shipyards aren't fighting for supplies against an army which is having to fight a massive land war, and they will be built. Their entire sea war will be the focus of it, so they will probably be turning out improved warriors very quickly. And that is one of the things. The warrior class are already being followed by the defense class, followed by other ships. So the British have a consistent construction line already going in terms of ironclads. Yes, they will need to speed them up. Yes, they will need to have more. But they have a lot more ships to begin with, and they are ordering them. And this will be an ocean fight. And it was one of the interesting things about the USS Monitor is, of course, the wood's on the outside, the steel's on the inside, or the iron's on the inside. On the Warrior, the iron's on the outside, the teak's on the inside. So they both have very similar armor styles, because that's how to make it work. Yogi Khan, Turkey filled in the cotton gap. Yes, it did. Paul from Chicago, weren't corn laws still in effect? They'd just been repealed. As Stan Primus points out, it's the Ottoman Empire, not Turkey, but honestly, it's Turkish part of the Ottoman Empire. North Africa rather than modern Turkey. To an extent, that's for corn. But also, cotton came in from other places as well, yeah. Fred, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. Mitchell Oates, the problems caused by Confederate raiders going after Union whaling fleet. Imagine having the Royal Navy coming after them. It's a distant blockade. Vision, monitors were ideal for narrow, shallow coastal waters, used for high seas. USS's attempt at high seas monitors failed due to low freeboard. USS Minotaur and USS Dictator versus HMS Devastation. Don't go there, that's just painful. Dev Squad, if the USS Monitor gets in close, can HMS Warrior depress the guns close enough to hit her? Well, as I said, the only scenario I see Monitor getting in close is if there's an unprotected harbour and Warrior's taken by surprise somehow. If it's any other scenario, if Warrior is alerted at all and able to act at range, or they're in a defended harbour which has booms and things across and has patrol boats wandering about, then she'll be up to sea or up to speed or able to orientate all her guns on the monitor. And that's the other thing. Let's say they are in a harbour, but it has one entrance, and Warrior's positioned so her guns cover that entrance. And the monitor comes along and is trying to get through a boom, so she's stopped there. And so the Warrior can focus all her guns at range. If Monitor gets really, really close, no, she can't depress her guns far enough. But if she's at a respectable distance away, let's say 3,000, 4,000 yards, yeah, it's not going to be fun to be on the Monitor. It won't be fun. There'll be a lot of things screaming over her and screaming into her. That's good. That is why I think Warrior would ram or rather run over, even though Alexander Clark seemed to suggest not, which makes me sad. As I said, I don't think she needs to. And also, if you ram the Monitor, that's going to cause a lot of damage to your ship. Warrior can sweep the ocean of pretty much every other US Navy ship available at the time and can severely damage Monitor if she keeps at range. Why would you risk that to guarantee a kill of the Monitor? Sam Thompson, note that major opposition to waging civil war came from the Middle Western states, depending on Mississippi River, to ship grain. Observe northern seizure of that river was imperative for trade. Yep. Thank you, Sam Thompson. Jerk. In conjunction with Jerk's squad question, I had a faint idea that Warrior vs. Monitor may bring ramming into fashion a few years before Loser, out of sheer annoyance by one of the sides. Possibly, but I think actually I'd be more likely to see Monitor try and ram Warrior than Warrior try to man Monitor, because... But also, here's the thing. There is such a speed imbalance between the two. If we go back quickly... I don't want to drop the Iron Brew. So, Warrior's cruising speed is 11 knots. Her top speed is 14 knots. The Monitor's top speed is 6 knots. That's not her cruising speed. That's her top speed. In other words, the Warrior's top speed, the Warrior's cruising speed is double the Monitor's top speed, and the Warrior's top speed is more than double the Monitor's top speed. Why would Warrior want to sort of sit around going, I'm going to stand here and be blasted at by you, or I'm going to actually go as at my cruising speed and just do a leisurely port turn or starboard turn, depending on which way works best for me, and keep circling you and blowing you up from range, making you dizzy. Because what will they do? Will they keep the tracking with their turret and keep going around with the turret the whole time and keep working the turret mechanism to try and follow the Warrior? It's not. Let's put it this way. In any sea where the Warrior can't really make out the Monitor at a sufficient range for that, it's probably too rough a sea for the Monitor, so the Monitor gets sunk by the sea anyway. So either way, as I said, I think the Monitor's only chance if it manages to catch the Warrior when it's hiding. Oh! Samuel Thompson, thank you very much for the super chat. That's very kind of you. Really enjoying the volume of output. Something for the Iron Brew Fund. Interwar Iron development has been fascinating. There is more coming on that. Thank you. Bichon, Warrior versus Monitor in the Mississippi River, not ideal for Warrior. New Orleans is far upriver. River narrow and shallow. I have a feeling what would have happened, it's going to sound strange, I did give an example. A, you would have to get Monitor to the Mississippi River for it to happen. You'd either have to take it over land, or you'd have to get it round the coast down by sea. Not very good things. But also, My feeling is Warrior and the Royal Navy would convoy the merchant ships to a certain point, and then the Confederates would convoy the merchant ships up the river. So it would be Confederate monitors or Confederates versions of Virginia or Confederates steamships escorting them up the river. The Royal Navy ships would stay out at the sea ocean ports. I don't think HMS Warrior would have ever. The Royal Navy wouldn't take its ocean ships into a tight space because at the ocean they guarantee themselves. In the tight waters, they don't. The RN might also break the blockade along the Gulf Coast, and that would interest the French, who had eyes on Mexico, from what I remember. Yeah, that would interest them. I know nothing about Christmas Carol from Muppets version. But the British will hopefully have some chance in New Orleans from last time and will have learnt from the mistakes. Oh, yes, I'm sure. But also this time, remember, they'll be dealing with they'll be supporting the people who are actually there. Michelotes. For open ocean against RN, Union Navy may have concentrated more on ships like New Ironsides than on monitor types. I think they would have, Michelotes. I do think they would have had to, but I also think that that's a huge commitment. The main point here is this. I am Lincoln's cabinet, right? I am fighting the Confederates. I have my army all around the place. And now you're telling me I'm fighting the Royal Navy and I'm going to have to build not just monitors and those sort of ships for fighting in the inshore waters against Confederate vessels in those inshore waters, in those rivers, and various paddle steamers, which I'm going to convert to armored ships to take the fight in those rivers. But I'm also going to fight ironclads myself, like Warrior, to fight in the oceans to deal with the Royal Navy. Whereas the British only have to concentrate on building the ocean ships. Don't even have to worry about an army, really, just reinforcing Canada. Oh, and I've also got to deal with the British forces up in Canada, because can I leave them unattended? And I've got to fight on the lakes. And the whole point of this scenario is it's not good for them. I was asking, also, Monitor can aim guns literally at any point blank range only. Mars on Warrior grant better visibility and a chance for accurate long-range fire. Yes. Can Warrior's guns penetrate Monitor? Eventually, yes, they can. Same with Monitor. Monitors are penetrating Warriors. Dr. Charles, how long before the British middle class, Joint Bride, etc., start really freaking out about fighting a war in defense of slave states? Okay, so the thing is, constant drowsiness, is that this is over a violation of British sovereignty. And the thing is, those same middle classes who didn't like slavery and didn't want to fight again, didn't want to support the Confederacy, were also outraged at this violation of British, sovereignty. As I said, this is a mail ship. The reaction: the United States man of war falling in with British mail steamer. This was used. That's the legal one again. Okay. There were sort of all sorts of issues. I'm just trying to look up for my copy of it. Pretty much the constant press, and I'm just looking for it. Yes, here it is. The London Chronicle, which is definitely a middle-class paper at the time. Mr. Seward is exerting himself to provoke a quarrel with Europe, in that spirit of senseless egotism which induces the Americans, with their dwarf fleet and shapeless, massive, incoherent squads, which they call an army, to fancy themselves the equal of France by land and Great Britain by sea. The London Standard saw the capture as but one series of premeditated blows aimed at this country to involve it in a war with northern states, and honestly, various other ones, which I have to say I found quite interesting because I found a very cool book on the subject, which I've been reading. Gordon Warren's Fountain of Discontent, The Trent Affair and Freedom of the Seas, published in 1981. And I managed to get a copy downloaded from my university, so that's what I've been using. Basically, the whole problem is that whilst, yes, Britain didn't support slavery, and I do go into this, they also don't support you smashing their ships. So the thing is, supporting slavery, Britain would never declare war to support slave states. But if the Union decides to attack Britain, which is what this is considered, because it's attacked on a British-flagged Royal Mail steamer, so it's a Royal Mail ship, that is a different matter. It's not a case of Britain declaring war because of supporting a slave state. It's Britain declaring war because they're being aggressive to us. Vision. US industry could build iron ships, but not very fast. Dictator, Puritan, and Dango was built pretty fast, but small, shallow draft twin turret monitor. They do take a while to build, and also, again, Britain can build faster and build more, and concentrates efforts far more than the Americans can. New IQA 472. If your monitor gets so close that Warrior can't depress the guns low enough, then the Royal Marines are going to be getting excited. Yes. Later monitors did carry cannon to deal with small cannon to deal with borders, bitch on his right, but USS Monitor didn't. I don't see the UK supporting the Confederates. Rather, I see them fighting US for their own goal, goal separate from the Confederate states. No invasion, just blockade and defending Canada. The thing is, Jeff, my enemy's enemy is my friend. So I don't see Britain sending troops to support the Confederates. But breaking the blockade and making sure there are supplies to America does help. There's a reason for this. Britain will not want to impose a close blockade. It doesn't really have enough ships and the capability to do it at that time, especially not with the forts and things like USS Monitor coming out. It'll want to do a distant blockade. But it will actually need some bases on the American East Coast to be able to do this. The only one who can supply those bases properly are the Confederates. And also, if Britain wants to stop an invasion of Canada, the thing is, we can build a massive army up in Canada, but the best way to stop an invasion of Canada is to keep the Confederate armies active in the South. So again, recognizing the Confederacy, giving them some supplies, that's the thing. I don't expect to see British troops on the shore fighting alongside the Confederates at any point, and I don't expect it to be a sort of a very strict formal alliance, but escorting of trade ships in, of British merchant convoys and all these things, that'd be possible. It's a war after all, and again, the British are very practical. Look at who we've allied with in wars when it's been against people. Our enemy's enemy is our friend, i.e., we allied with Stalin in World War II. We allied with some even less nice people in World War II. We sent them supplies because they were the enemies of the Nazis. We've done this before. Napoleonic Wars. Look at some of the people we ally with. Britain aren't choosy. When we're fighting a war, we pick whoever's fighting and we'll support them. Afterwards, we'll be choosy, but, during the war, no. I don't think Ian Carr can't the RN just acquire the monitor as usual. I don't think they'd really want to. Samuel Thompson, were lessons from the Crimea learned by US Navy and how would they apply to the Civil War? I would argue the monitor and quite a lot of Scott's Great Snake are actual lessons from the Crimean War. JP, I can see the UK blockading both sides. I don't think they have ships to blockade both sides. Vision, wouldn't Warrior have to sail into port like New York Harbor, Hampton Roads to fight US Navy models? They're not going to sortie like the High Sea Fleet. Perhaps the battle in Chesapeake Bay? I don't think the British want to fight with the Monitor. They're not going to go looking for a fight, which they don't need to do it. They just need to have a fight. They just need to win the war. Dan Freeman, I see Britain, well, Canada, getting some choice bits of the Pacific Northwest while US tries to get them. Getting to stop hurting them from Britain probably help squash CSA. Given the British public is not fans of slavery, in popular opinion in Britain, very pro-union. Yes, very pro-union, but that's actually, again, I would point out, Britain becomes very pro-union as the war goes on. This is 1861. At this point, there is all sorts of state rights myths going around. There's all sorts of different discourse in public thing. And again, this was seen as an attack on a British, and it was an attack on a British Royal Mail steamer. Not a Royal Navy warship, but not far below. Okay? So this is the point. If the Trent Affair is a potential casus belli, and what we're doing is we're saying, if there had been a war, that's what caused it. So we have to accept that there was, for this entire thing to be discussed, that it did cause it somehow. Descott, US presidents learned in the War of 1812. Messing with the Canadians is really bad idea unless you want your wine drunk, dinner eaten, and house burned down. The Canadians in 1861 are not really at the level they were in 1812. Relatively. Now, if, of course, let's put it this way. If they manage to get a separate thing, that's a difference. But it doesn't really happen that way. So, the core points of what might have been in this war. Britain would have to reinforce Canada and Bermuda with the army. Actually, they do that. They're putting 30,000 troops in Canada by the time the crisis is over, the affair is over. The British would probably, even if they're impacting their own blockade on the Americans, that would definitely limit the the Union blockade of the Confederates. If the British decide to break the blockade, which they probably would do, because it would be very sensible strategically for them, they would immediately transform the Confederate economy, but also their logistics. Because remember, Confederate logistics, it has a problem in that all its logistics, all its train lines, all its things go from the internal to external. They don't go laterally. They rely on ships for lateral movement. The blockade, the great thing about the blockade, isn't the trade it blocks or King Cotton. It's the logistics it impacts and the movement of troops and personnel around. The Union can move troops and personnel where they wish. They can reinforce and move them around the sea as they like. They can't do. The Confederates can't do that because of the blockade. It wouldn't have been a walkover, as I've said repeatedly. That the US had not built itself up. The British don't have the ships to do a close blockade and smash the US Navy up, but they do have enough that they can easily do some convoys and merchants. They can deal with the local blockades, and they can cause a lot of trouble for the Union. And they can probably stop Canada. Would British involvement inside the Confederacy lead to France signing the Union? Nope, because unfortunately, Napoleon III is pretty much adamant that, well, he's got enough internal issues, and he doesn't like the precedent the Americans have set. So therefore, likely outcome, I'm sorry, a negotiated peace. It's not fun to talk about this. I don't think if it does turn into war, I don't think it turned into a long war. And I think that the British Confederates, it ends up with the Unions actually potentially having to accept the Confederacy breaking away. I think it stops the war for a short time only, and then probably Union and Confederates start at it again, up again, and start a fight again. But I wouldn't be surprised if it leads to a 6 to 12-month peace after there's been a treaty with Britain and the Confederates and the Union over it. Because, again, the other reason the British would end up having to sign the Confederates is this was over the Confederate envoys on the Royal Mail steamer. So that is the other reason we end up siding with them. We don't really like them because of slavery, and I think if they're in round 2, we wouldn't have been there for them at all. But this scenario does not. As I said, my theory is this scenario ends very quickly, and then the US and the Confederacy and the Union spend the next 12 months building up as rapidly as they can, and then there's another war. Right. Hello, Sir Thompson. Vision, I see RN building its own shallow draft ironclads that would necessarily to duke it out USN. Ericsson versus Cole. Possibly, but again, if the war is a short one, and I wouldn't be surprised if it lasted no longer than the end of 1862, I doubt it would be. They would actually have managed to build them in that time. Journalist, yes, I know the Trent Affair and that the US sailors boarded the vessel. Yes. So that's sort of starting. Jeff Beeler, War in Canada 1861 is amateurs versus amateurs, with the British having to fight a professional corps and the US having a professional corps and the US professionals fighting for itself. Traditionally, true, but again, there'd be far more American ones than probably British ones, at least initially. Hello, Stafford Thompson. Division. James Buchanan's had a very good turret design used in river monitors that included steam to rotate turret, rather run the guns out and damping recoil and lower guns for loading below decks. Cool. Breaking the blockade and making sure the Confederation is supplied, preferably by general British loans. Pretty much. Again, it would be exactly the same as we did with the Prussians in Napoleonic Wars. There is strong precedent for this. Jeff Beeler, how would an 1812 blockade be different from an 1861 one? Probably it would be far more distant blockade. I don't expect the British to be ending up around a lot of US ports. But I wouldn't be surprised if you have the British blockading certain points around the world and making sure trade isn't reaching them. And also then when you realise how the sheer preponderance of British merchant shipping in global trade at this point, that could have made the issue very, very big. Simon Thompson, how did wartime US-UK maritime trade compare to pre-war Confederate state trade? Thinking trade-offs are British. Basically, the British trade more with the North than they do with the South. But again, this is about, as we said, we've gone over, it's the Royal Mail steamer being attacked. And this is the thing. If this had led to war, if the Union, let's say the Union decide not to return the Confederate envoys. Let's say Lincoln decides that he is going to pick a fight. For some reason, Seward persuades him, and that's what they want. They do actually decide to pick a fight with Britain. Because that's far more likely, because the British don't want to get in a fight, because they don't like the Confederacy, because of the slavery issue. But they will do, and they are drawing up plans to do so just in case. Jeff Hillam, you can see why the United States backed down as fast as it could. Pretty much, it's the thing is, on paper, you can go, and I've read some really excellent documents which talk about how it would have been very difficult for the Britain to impose the same type of blockade as they did in 1812, and how the Monitor could beat the Warrior if they got, in certain circumstances and shallow water and all these things. And I sit there and go, you are right. But you are expecting the British to turn up and behave the same way as they have done before. Well, they don't have to. They could well impose distant blockade. They'd be quite happy to do so. They would need to reinforce Bermuda. They need to reinforce Canada and have fleets there. And if they have a fleet in the Caribbean, well, they could well turn the Caribbean and that sort of area to the south of the United States into a no-go area for Union shipping. In which case, a whole load of trade is going in and out that way. You could well have a relocation of the Confederate capital from Virginia down somewhere south so it's more protected, and that could change the whole motion of the war. The RN only has 3 ships from Royal Engineers and Royal Marines in the East Pacific. The RN has 6 ships. They have 3 frigates, steam frigates, etc. available. One of which is considered a first-class steam frigate, and the others aren't. And has 3 more patrol ships, which are steam-powered. One of which has terrible boilers. So they have 6 ships in the Pacific. The U.S. Navy has none. They have 2 treasury cutters out there. So it doesn't really matter how many ships the Royal Navy has in the Pacific. They're going to win that fight. Hi, Carl Harmon. Didn't realize you're live today. Live today and tomorrow and Sunday. And was live yesterday, but not on this channel, on a different thing. That's sometimes, Doc Clark. Take care. We'll have a great meme for the Discord this evening. Ooh, cool. I look forward to it. Frederick, the second worst thing than attacking an iron ship. That's the thing. A Royal Mail steamer is the second worst thing to stop. Rebecca, Racecar Meerkat, hello. The World War series by Turtle Dove begins with Britain and France mediating a peace and splitting the USA into USA and CSA after CSA wins at Gettysburg. Calendron, a better version of saying my enemy's enemy is a problem for later. Until then they might be useful. Yep. Jim Hughes, I don't think you get a negotiated peace. If you have the involvement of British, it would only enrage the Union more and solidify democratic support behind the cause rather than being split. You see, the thing is, the reason I go for it being a mediated peace is A, because of the supplies and materials which no longer will be flowing in to the Union from abroad, and B, I don't think the British would want more than that, and I think at a certain point it would be sorted out by that. I don't think anyone would agree with it, and I think there would actually be a full-blown war later on between the USA and the CSA, and there would be ongoing issues between the USA and Britain after it. But again, this is the thing, this is what happens. Vision. You can see British attitudes towards Union shift in the cartoons from Magazine Punch, going from demonizing Lincoln to mourning his death. Yep. Vision. Love the Punch cartoon with Britannia leaning on a cannon with a hand on Leonard, waiting for a reply. Yes. Alright, Bellona. Hello! Just back after a day out in the hills. First snow of the season. Ooh, cool. Enjoy. Jamie Hughes. Exactly. You probably get some Benedict Arnolds in the South who would turn against the Confederacy because of British involvement. Yes and no. You might do, but you might not. The thing is, British involvement will be seen as being brought, and was actually in the South was greeted as, because it was Union overreach. It was Union interfering in their diplomatic envoys, interfering in a British ship. Okay, it's a Royal Mail steamer. As I've said repeatedly, it's the one thing down from a Royal Navy ship. If the Union hadn't discreetly apologised and returned the envoys, if they hadn't done those things, they would have got into a lot of trouble because they would have forced the British hand. You would probably get the British go. First off, would be we're sending a major fleet out to America, to the West Indies station, North American West Indies station. At which point, the U.S. Navy would have Lincoln and Seward would have probably gone, you send out ships, we'll treat it as an act of war. The British would have gone, we're sending out ships because you haven't apologized, and we're sending them out to escort our merchant ships through the war zone. Then you would have got a U.S. Navy Captain Wilkes or somewhat similar to him deciding that they're going to interfere in another mail steamer, which could mean carrying more envoys, because let's be honest, the Confederacy aren't stupid. They would start sticking their envoys on British mail steamers, hoping for a repeat incident. The repeat incident happens and war kicks off. It's not a nice scenario, but it's what is a likely possibility. Dan Riemann, I don't think the British would join the CSA then, as the Emancipation Proclamation of September 1862 would make it very politically difficult to turn pro-CSA in 1863. I agree, but as I said, this is 1861 to the beginning of 1862. This is long before the Emancipation Proclamation. It's while there is still very much slavery in some parts of the Union, and the end of slavery is not part of the Union's war aims, so things change as they go on. Hello, Shomac. Hi, Roland Cash. Jamie Hughes, how dependent upon global trade was the North even? It wasn't an exporter company like South, and world trade being strangled off would just cause more domestic manufacturing via supply and demand. They needed a lot of materials from around the world, saltpeter being one of them for explosives. A lot of guns, a lot of shells were coming in from abroad, especially in 1861. You have to consider the Union economy by 1865 has built up its industry dramatically. In the initial phases of the war, 1861, 1862, foreign imports are really, really critical. So yes, it will get there, but getting there requires a lot of imports going on. Alex Jacobs, boarding a neutral flag vessel is not exactly unknown for our Navy. Stuff happens, but the Iron is not looking for a third fight against the US. Again, the whole point of this is a what-if scenario, and therefore the Royal Navy is not looking for it. But again, the Royal Navy isn't looking for this fight, and the Britain isn't looking for the fight. But the idea is, if you have a scenario where they have no choice to fight, they will fight, and they do it quite well. The US Navy, this whole scenario is predicated on it going hot, and it goes hot. The only real reason it would go hot, because the British really don't want to get involved in the war, is if the Union side do not hand over the Confederate envoys, do not apologize discreetly, but they apologize, and carry on doing. If they did it again, or if they didn't hand over the envoys, these are all things which could cause war. Because if you start attacking British ships, and again, if we go back to the rules as I explained them, the British criteria, that ship had to, the Americans could not have searched the government papers aboard. If they searched the British government papers, that's an act of war. And because they didn't take the ship to a prize court and adjudicate it fairly under that, that is where you get into the illegality. Okay, and it causes Napoleon III to side up with the British on this. There is really not much wiggle room. And the British acknowledge themselves later, when they're dealing with the Asamaru incidents, that they should have taken the Asamaru to a prize court. They claim they didn't want to interfere with the transport of the people, etc. But again, the British, from the Asamaru incident, end up having to release a lot of the merchant sailors, but they stop it happening again. Sure, the British objective would probably be extremely limited. So, like I said, Europe is generally not cool slavery, not at this point. But Westwick, what would the Oregon Canada look like after the peace treaty? A lot more of it would probably be British. Think of islands. Dan thinking about the Pacific Theater, could the British just undertake a punitive raid on somewhere like San Francisco, given the gold rush? Ooh, maybe. Probably not, but they could have done some interesting things. Vision, during the American Civil War, the RNUSN shelled Japan. These things happen. New IKB 472. Before the Civil War, the rail gauges in the continental US varied from standard 4 foot 8 inches and a half all the way to 6 foot. Most of the non-standard was in the south. Yep. Dev Squad, given the massive economic superiority of the Union, would the UK risk much larger levels of trade with the Union than they had with the Confederacy? Better to force a concession. You might think so, but again, Britain can't afford. Okay, how to put this? So here's the thing. If Britain allows America to get away at this point with attacking one of their flagships without saying anything, then other people can do it and say you've let it, because maritime law is set in precedent. If Britain do not do something, do not respond to it, they are making themselves weaker. Part of the point of being a part of the reason you are considered the global power, the world superpower, the world's foremost power at this point, is because Britain doesn't let countries get away with it. The moment you start looking weak, i.e. not responding when someone's aggressive to you, you are weak. Because power, most of the power is about perception of what British power is. So if the British act weak or act unconfident or act indecisive, that's when they are weak and are weak and considered weak by the rest of the world. So they have to. So this is one of those scenarios where Britain's in a catch-22. They don't want a war on the side of the Confederates. They don't want to back up the Confederates because they're slavery. But they also cannot afford to let the Union get away with doing such a grievous insult to the national flag, because that would undermine Britain's position on the world and encourage lots of other people to start attacking Britain. So Britain can't afford it because, okay, yes, it might avoid one war, but it'll probably start off dozens of others around the world, which they'll have to fight because of other powers seeing weakness. So this is that sort of scenario. If America doesn't, if the Union and Lincoln's government does not back down, does not hand over the envoys and does not return them, then Britain cannot afford. It would make Britain look weak. So as I said, Britain would have to deploy the squadron. Then you would have probably had the Americans acting up against the squadron. You'd have had a set of people in a mail steamer, and it would have been just not fun. Jamie Hughes, I think your situation might work for a short war. The issue comes up once there's been major bloodletting on the part of the Union and the goal of the war becomes more emancipation. If it does become emancipationist, then that becomes a problem for British politics. But as I said, I think Britain would try and end the war by 1962, end of 1962. I think it would be a short war. Dirt Squad, I suppose that's essentially what happened in real life. Bingo. But if the unions hadn't done the concession, you see, the whole thing is, if the unions union doesn't concede and give back the envoys, then that's what forces Britain into a situation. So it's one of those scenarios where the only way the Union can gain back control of the situation is by actually submitting in a way and handing back people. That's the only way. If the more they can, basically, it goes to being in the power of the British mob, and it's a huge insult. Hello, Melody 16040. Hello. Right then. Dan Freeman, the amusing thing on the whole affair is the complete lack of success of the Confederate diplomats in getting any support. Yep. No, Shulmack. The British objective to be limited and proportional. There were no way the British were going to be all in for the CSS. No. So don't expect British troops to be supporting the Confederates at a battle of Gettysburg or anything like that. Nothing on that scenario. But running the blockades a few times to annoy the Americans and the Unions and show that they could do it? Yeah. Reinforcing Canada? Yes. Maybe doing something in Oregon? Those are potentials. Cal Hammond, what is a Royal Mail steamer? What is their importance and role? Well, they're exactly the same. They are steamers either chartered or owned by the Royal Mail, i.e. the British mail carrying service, so kind of like FedEx. And, well, FedEx isn't really the same anymore, but, part of like the US Postal Service, it's the Royal Mail in the UK. And so it is technically a British government owned ship. which exists to carry the mail and deal the communications around the Empire. It's a civilian ship, but it keeps the mail and the important communications. Most importantly, it carries the British government communications around the world. So it's the closest to the thing of being a British ship. The CIA. This topic brought to you by me because Dr. Light was paid by a visit by some big scary men. No big scary men as far as I know. Haven't seen anyone. But yeah, I'm fairly sure the CIA is rigging the patron votes. I'm not sure how, but they are. Hello to CIA. Hope you're doing well. Then a different what if might be if the Trent Affair had not happened as it did, might the US Civil War have gone differently with CSA hopes for international relations dashed earlier? Possibly. In fact, actually, it was often union events, which actually kept the CSA's hope for having these things more these sort of international recognition up high. Naval, I doubt the CSA would have imploded any earlier than they did. After all, they went on far beyond what's considered as bearable for any army. Yeah. Hello, Earthborn Gnome. Ryan Cash, what would the number of men stationed in Canada? Would opening Northern Front against be a viable option? At the beginning of the Trent Affair, you have 5,000 regular soldiers. You have 5,000 militia, of which 1,000 are considered viable. And you have technically 100,000 other in a secondary form of militia, of which none are considered viable. By the end of the Trent Affair and the time the Americans return the envoys and all these things happen, you basically have 30,000 regulars in Canada. The trained, viable militia has gone up to something around 13,000, of which 11,000 are actually considered good quality troops. And the 100,000 odd personnel has produced about another 10,000 viable soldiers. So you have about 50,000 troops in Canada, mostly concentrated in the eastern part of Canada. Sure, Mac. Rankash, there's no desire for one on the British side. It's a punitive war to prove a point rather than supporting CSA to the end. Yeah, pretty much. Then, this is one what if where the average American is likely much better informed than the average Brit on the subject. Probably true. Although, considering what some of the American historians write about the prospects of the Royal Navy versus the Union Navy at this point, I'm not sure what they're on. Because, again, they're all expecting the British to refight the War of 1812 and not to have realised the world has moved on technologically. But the British would have realised that one. Vision. For Lincoln to blunder into a war with Britain, he wouldn't have been Lincoln, but he could have been Seward at one point. So, this is the point. If Lincoln had been listening to Seward, then yeah. Carmen, why wouldn't you carry government info on a warship which is armed? Because Britain has traditionally used the Royal Mail steamers, because if you have the warships, then the warships have to come off station. So it leaves the warships on station. The Royal Mail steamers are constantly going around the world. They're a constant network of trade ships moving around the world, of constantly moving communiques. So yes, very important materials like fortification notes, etc., could well be taken backwards and forwards. But things like diplomatic papers and the communiques from ambassadors, etc., would often be collected and then go on the quickest Royal Mail steamer back to Britain. So it's a very important ship in terms of what it carries and in terms of who owns it. As said, it's a Royal Mail steamer, so it is technically Crown property. So, as I'm saying, whereas a warship is considered sovereign territory, The Royal Mail steamer is to be considered to be carrying something called sovereign goods, okay, and sovereign materials, and those are its Royal mail bags, especially principally the government ones. The civilian ones don't matter so much, but the government ones, they are considered sovereign property. Touch those, it's an act of war. Okay, that's the thing. And as I said, this is the whole point. As when I was talking about the beginning, if Fairfax had done as Wilkes wanted and searched all those searched all those bags, that would have been an act of war. Straight up, simple act of war. You don't do it on international relations at this point. If Fairfax had actually brought in Trent as a prize ship and hadn't touched it, that would have actually been legally more sound than what they did. Because by letting the ship go, but only having taken off prisoners, they'd actually acted illegally because they hadn't had a prize court adjudication. And they were defining the human personnel as contraband. And this is, again, different from Liverpool and Asamaru, because at that point, the British aren't defining those people as contraband. They're defining them as combatants under the rules of law as established by Germany, because they are all potentially conscripted up into the German Navy. And again, that does work at that time, but those rules don't exist in 1861. And so in 1861, Wilkes is defining people as contraband, and it creates a whole new legal precedents and issues. And it, again, the Union ends up handing over and disavowing it, basically. Jamie Hughes, I think you rather estimate the influence of naval warfare on what was fundamentally continental war. I think more likely outcome is a long war and you are losing Canada. Saltpeter could be produced domestically. All these things can be produced domestically and all these things, but yes, you can do it, but it takes time. And during that time, you have to deal with the other side fighting. So the thing is, yes, you can deal with that issues, but then you have to deal with fighting a war with Britain and a war with the Confederacy. And this is my point. The whole point, if we go back to the Anaconda Plan, is you're encircling the Confederacy. If you consider a war against Britain and the Confederacy, you have suddenly encircled yourself, if you're the Union. And if you think about all the Irish personnel and all these sort of things, who basically Irish immigrants who come to America and end up joining the army and all these things, my point is the war would be short. It would be agreed by diplomacy, and I think it would be over. But I think if the war happens, it happens, sort of thing. Jamie Hughes, the Confederacy seems to do pretty well not running out most war despite the pretty effective blockade. They do pretty well, but if you take out the blockade, you have a lot more interesting things for the Confederacy. Instead of them trying to just get by, they can actually start moving and organizing. So I found about Jamie Hughes, do you have any idea how much gunpowder they blew through with those black powder guns? Discovering nitrates in mines was why warfare went up a notch, I recall. It did help. Roman Cash, if the Union was scared by the rebel yell, can you imagine their reaction to bagpipes? I don't think they were scared by the rebel yell, and bagpipes would have probably confused the life out of them. But they had bagpipes in their own military bands actually at one point. Mark Ward, would the entry of the RN have weakened the Union with border states joining the CSA? Well, again, in 1861, it could have caused issues. Jeff Healer, I can see the British lifting the blockade of ports like Wilmington, where there are only ships, but not like Richmond, where there are forts. Too costly for unlimited war as this would have been. Yeah, I agree. Blockades, but only ships, and if you're looking at the south coast, probably theirs, but that's about it. That's good. The other differences with the War of 1812, the UK isn't distracted by a major European war. The UK could focus its force on the US in a way it couldn't in 1812. Yep. Anonymous, agreed. The CSA has no path to victory in 1860. It's the same kind of thinking that ruined Germany and Japan in 1959. Agreed. They're only path to victories if, and it's full of lots of what ifs, if they don't happen. Mainly 16 or 40. So basically, Crown Estate boat ships. Bingo. That's the Royal Mail steamers. Garmin, what is the modern way which they replace a steamer? Okay, right then. They are called the Silver Greyhounds, and they are special diplomatic service couriers. And they fly on aircraft. They go on on standard airliners. They usually get flown first class because they have a briefcase attached to them. It's actually handcuffed to them and locked and all sorts of securely. And the materials are put in that briefcase. And this is when you have physical materials you need to transport. Usually it's done by electronic communications way. But if it's got physical materials that need to be moved, they go in that briefcase and the person basically they are attached to it, and they don't even have the key to get in it. So it's locked at the embassy end. They take it. This courier takes it, gets on the plane, goes to the UK. It's unlocked in the Foreign Office, and they never see inside it, but they carry it the whole way. Touching them is again considered an act of war. So if you ever see a very quiet looking person walking through with a case trained with probably a rather large number of guards from the airport around them, getting them through and getting them straight on, and they're going straight on to first class. That is probably a Silver Greyhound. It might be a British one, it might be any of the other ones, because all countries have variations on it. But they are very, very cool people, but they are very quiet, and no one wants anything to happen to them. No one, because the issues that if anything happens to one of them on your soil are just too big. So you get them through your airport as quickly as possible. In fact, I have a friend who works in airport security, and their exact phraseology is the biggest nightmare they get is when they get the call that one of them is 10 minutes out, and they never get more than 10 minutes warning. They're just about to come onto the airport. But when they get the call that one is 10 minutes out, literally there is a surge team. They send security personnel to. It's like dealing with a celebrity in terms of level of security they're putting out, but even more so. Right. Thomas Manuel, Jim Hughes, yes, no, because it's quite clear that by 1863 they're being outgunned by the Union in every single battle. But no expert should look up numbers. Another task. Yeah. That is one of the things. By 1863, but that's by the time the Union's built up. It's 1861 we're talking about. Dirt Squad, by the taking the envoys and not the entire ship, have they essentially acted as pirates, taking the ship as a prize as an act of nation, taking prisoners, hostages, piracy? Pretty much. It is sort of iffy. Anonymous, yes, yes, at this time the history states could and did at times undertake reprisals. It was lawful then. These days it is too, but with many qualifications. Sean Mack, the British would probably have wanted to extract better trade terms from the Union, given that the largest issue the British had was the Union protectionism. Probably. Vision. Both US State Department and British Foreign Office relied on RM Steamers and US Postal System to deliver their transatlantic dispatches at this time. System required trust. Trent Affair broke that trust. Yeah, tremendously. CSA versus USA shows the importance of ideology in war. UN can't go to war for the sake of USA purely for ideological reasons. However, in the case of ideology can be the cause, but in this way, as long as the other side don't start causing issues with their trade is the basic things. Dan Freeman, I think that at the point of Trent Affair, the underseas cable across the Atlantic had broken, so communication was dependent on shipborne lines of communication. There weren't as many undersea cables as they had been previously, as there are nowadays, and they're still being upgraded. And it's really the Great Eastern needs to make some more voyages. Okay. Anonymous, Britain's long-term strategy since the Treaty of Paris has been to make the USA not quite the Queen's bitch, but involved. Vision. Also, Britain has to do is protect. All Britain has to do is Sea Lane's Confederacy. Point made. Union either accepts it or tries to wage bigger war by invading Canada and likely again losing, as in 1812. That is pretty much the British plan of operations. Animus, is the French naval equivalent? Yeah, diplomatic courier is above me, my pay grade, lol. Aviso is the French naval. Oh, cool. And also, you have a 4-man team surrounding you, but not in uniform or right nearby. A floating box is a term for it. That is done in some airports, and done with most. But if you're dealing with the Chinese courier in the British airport system, I seem to remember they demand that there has to be 2 uniformed officers as well nearby. I seem to remember reading that somewhere. Jim Hughes, my father carried diplomatic packages in Saudi Arabia to Jordan by land. I overestimated the number of guards, though. 2 arm wrestlers in a car. This was the 80s between 2 friendly places, though. Only 16 or 40. Never heard the term silver greyhound for diplomatic courier before. It's a cool phrase that they come up with. Death Squad. They don't have to have the key to remove it from their wrist either. The diplomatic package can be anything, up to and including a cargo container, not tied it to it. Then, yes, but if they are in a cargo container, and it's going on a cargo plane, then there tends to be more than one of them, and it tends to be a specially chartered civilian cargo aircraft or an RAF aircraft. Sometimes turns up. Carharman, modern RN versus RN of 1800, QE class not allowed. Have you seen the 4.5-inch guns most all the Royal Navy warships carry? Yeah, no. They'll deal with that. Downstream, it is apparently embarrassing when someone drops a diplomatic bag to someone like Saudi and it goes clink or worse, smash, and then vodka or whiskey leaks out. That is very, very boring. Right, I'll be back in a second. I am just off to use the facilities. Surviving on Ironborough again. Yeah. We did it. Ugh. We, good lord. Hello again. Right. And then. Gahan, so what do you think would be the guard of Silver Greyhound heading to North Korea as we have an embassy there? Ooh. Well, technically, they don't need to be that. They don't need a massive guard because the thing is, if North Korea interfered in with the Silver Greyhound going to the embassy in North Korea, then we could interfere with all their equivalents going around in the world as well. So the thing is, the Silver Greyhounds are mostly protected not by physical people guarding them, but by diplomatic convention and the consequences of interfering with them. That's good. Dr. Clark, the nanos. For all people talking ideology, almost all wars start because of threat to money. Usually one side trading against wishes or another, or harming trade or aggrieved party. Sometimes. Anonymous. Moving of diplomatic pouches to denied areas generally requires officials in uniform. Denied areas, e.g., Russia, PRC, North Korea, Iran. Anonymous. Wars don't start because of ideology. Think carefully about the phrase. It has two turns of meaning. Anonymous. States don't start a war because of hostility, but they also don't stop a war once started with a state whose ideology is hostile to their own. Basically, ideologies tend to accentuate a disagreement and tend to cause it to go being far larger and far more powerful. Then I believe the greyhound came from an object in possession of the monarch and was broken off a stand of them as a sign they would be known by the receiver of a dispatch. And being generally from said monarch, as both he, she, and the recipient knew the item, it had been broken off. There are a few other options for them. I would say there's a lot of stuff going on about the idea of diplomatic pouches being used to transport narcotics. Interestingly enough, there have been cases where diplomatic pouches have been found, if they are found to have contained such things, by, let's say, systems which do automatic searches and sniffing for it, i.e., sniffer dogs. It can cause an issue in that how do I put this? The state will lodge a complaint with the consulate, etc., over which is local, and they can pass a ruling that that particular greyhound or their equivalent is not allowed to travel through their territory again, i.e., they revoke their diplomatic status. Causing it is very problematic, and if you do lose diplomatic status, that can be a very big issue. Let's be honest, North Korea don't usually care for president, or they might be back in there so long if it helps a short time. Does the Trent Affair go hot if Prince Albert dies before suggesting milder ultimatum wording? Potentially, but his wording is not that much milder. It's going to sound strange. It's quite strong in terms of diplomatic terminology. Whilst, yes, there is an impact on it, and it does affect. The wording isn't changed. It's changed to reflect some of his content and some of his suggestions. But okay, let's find it. Just tracking down in my notes. The interesting phrase is the American captain should have liked to have seen expression of hope and the American captain did not act under instructions, or if he did, that he misapprehended them. The United States must be fully aware that the British government could not allow its flag to be insulted, and the security of her mail communications to be placed in jeopardy, and that Her Majesty's government are unwilling to believe the United States intended wantonly to put an insult upon this country and to add to their many distressing complications by forcing a question of dispute upon us, and that we are therefore glad to believe that they wouldn't. The thing is, that is a nicer tone, perhaps, but also in diplomatic terms, that is basically saying you either disavow this or you are believed to have wantonly put an insult on Britain. You are believed to have done things. So it's sort of setting up a thing of, if you say you agree with this, it's fine, but basically you have to step back and admit that you've done wrong. If you do, we're giving you an out. You can blame it all on your captain and kick him out and say it's all been wrong, or you are admitting that you have done all this. You have violated international procedure. You have violated international law. You have violated the British flag. You have violated the Royal Mail steamer. You have violated Britain in acted in a wanton manner. It sounds nice until you start thinking about what admitting that you were saying no to it would do to you. Hmm. That's good. One example of the diplomatic pouch being opened was the rescuing of a Nigerian exile in the UK. Though I think they messed up and couldn't cross the T's and dotted I's. Disco Deco Affair. Yep. There are issues with all these things. Oh, by the way, I will say both things. If you are ever in Portsmouth Historic Dockyard, HMS Warrior is my favorite preserved ship to go round. I've been round, because the way they've handled her has been quite cool. There is also the fact, and please note, I did pick this specifically. That is a picture of her sailing to Portsmouth under her own power at the time, from Hartlepool, I think it was, where she'd been previously. So, pretty nice. Not sail power, I think they've done some refits. So she can technically move around. And the thing I like going to HMS Warrior, and I really would love to visit the Monitor Centre, because for the Mariners Museum, and go and have a look around that, because that looks really, really cool as well. But HMS Warrior is possibly my favourite preserved ship. I prefer her over Victory because of the story she tells. Because Victory is preserved because of the battles that are won in it. Warrior has been preserved because of the period of history she represents, the technological change, the transition, the time. She doesn't fight in a war. Actually, that's the one interesting thing. If the Trent Affair had gone hot, HMS Warrior would have fought in a war. And that could have been quite an interesting thing. But, Roland Cash, the engine rooms in Warrior are stunning. They are. They are very, very cool. Mm-hmm. And honest, but why was Galactica preserved? Because, again, she was cool. And if she wasn't preserved, the whole story of Battlestar Galactica wouldn't happen. I don't know. She said on her own power. I don't think it was steam power. I think she's been retrofitted with some slightly less steamy engines. I think that was the story. I would have to look it up, the actual details, but I know from other pictures she wasn't. She was only under tow at the last point where they brought in some tugs to look after her getting into Portsmouth Harbour and those sort of things. We can get into the Galactica discussion at another point. It is quite cool, the Starship Galactica. We are actually talking about future things now, moment. As you see, the Taranto ones are slowly going up. I think there's the Taranto 3 will be coming soon. As soon as Jamie gets it to me, I'll be putting it up. And we have lots of fun going on in the world at the moment. We have lots of ideas coming through, Stargate and all sorts of things. But one of the things, actually, this is what I want people to do, if you wouldn't mind. If you want Bill Trumps to look at Stargate, if you want us to look at all these things, we are happy to do it. But we need to have a source of images we can use for the discussion, because otherwise it's a very boring video of just us talking. So it might as well be a podcast. And so we need ideas of where we're going to get them and where we can get access to those for free. So that's the idea. If you want us to do these things, we would be very happy to do Babylon. We would be very happy. That would be Jamie's dream to do Babylon 5. We would be very happy to do Stargate because both me and Drac have ideas based on Atlantis and about how you could use it and various things on their other ships. I love some of their ships. And so we're be very happy to look at it, but we do need ideas of where we're going to get the stuff from, get the imagery from. Okay. Dan Freeman, could I get Warrior sailing again if not engines running? We could probably get Warrior. Actually, Warrior could probably get up to speed. You could probably get her out to water if you wanted. Anonymous, every museum ship should be ready to be mobilized in worst case scenario. I, for one, am all for mounting railguns on HMS Victory. I think you might need to work out the power source. Carl Hammond, what do you see the fate of the Type 23s being? Anything preserved or sold? I think if we're lucky, they get sold and operated by other nations. I don't think we'll get one preserved, although I would love one to be preserved because I think we should have one preserved as part of our Cold War memories, because they are the end of the Cold War. But there again, I'd like Leander class preserved from the Cold War. I'd have liked HMS Hermes preserved. I'd have liked an Invincible class. All sorts of things I'd like preserved, but they don't seem to have the money for them. I'm going to keep nagging the government and hope that something gets preserved. Staff Thompson, Warrior's engine room is as close to Mechanis Temple as we have now. Yes, it is. A Warhammer 40k, it is definitely would be interesting for us to do. And I was, Silence never sent their diplomats to the annual meetings. This parallels a historical event, I think it was Nurko. Possibly. Ron Cash, what do you think about today's naval announcements? All sounds very promising. I'm kind of interested. The Type 32 frigate, I wouldn't be surprised if we end up discussing that in bilge pumps. Type 32 frigate, would not be surprised if we end up discussing that in bilge pumps. It could be very, very interesting what could be going on. Thomas Vanderbilt, the only thing that got preserved from the Cold War is the current Russian Navy. I would say also sections of the Chinese Navy, but actually, the Russian Navy, don't discount it. They've got some good ships coming through. If they hadn't, their main problem is getting decent gas turbines at the moment, and I think they're going to solve that one quite soon. Kahaman, I want one to help show the progression of technology, and as they've been such hard-working ships, we also need a ship which we can grasp that's modern to help recruitment. Your dad just got you new Iron Brew. Your dad is very cool. If I had a choice, I would want a Type 23 preserved up in Liverpool or somewhere like that. I think it'd be nice to have some ships preserved up in that part of the country, because we currently don't. But it would be good. Your dad feels bad he stole your chocolate, so he bought you some new Iron Brew. Okay, good deal you've got going on there. Get him to get you some chocolate as well. Tom, I still don't understand the gas turbine concept. Recently looked it up. It's basically using exhaust of the ordinary engines to reheat. Pretty much. It's using the turbine potential and the speed it generates and the heat it generates to, in terms of moving the air and moving the parts, to really generate a huge amount of energy. Carmen, would you put ships in Wales? If so, where and what? Well, you've should start off with Cardiff. That really should, especially, and let's put it this way: if you get a ship in Liverpool and a ship in Cardiff, then you have preserved ships around Wales, which are quite good to have there. But honestly, it's got to be HMS Dragon going to Cardiff when eventually her time is up, because she's got a huge dragon painted on her for Wales. Lieutenant Leonard X-Ray, is there a country that's growing navy no one seems to be talking about? I often think Denmark doesn't get enough coverage, as we all know. I wouldn't really say they have a growing navy, but they do have a very capable navy. Singaporean navy tends to get quite a bit of talk about, but Vietnamese navy doesn't get enough attention. Vietnamese navy is pretty darn cool. If I was the Chinese, I'd be more worried about them than I would be anyone else, because the Vietnamese tend to produce very good strategic thinkers and tactical thinkers. On Brave Battle 5, there seems to be some on Shutterstock for editorial usage. No book cover usage, if anyone knows what that means. That means you can use it to discuss it, but you can't use it to discuss it if you're doing what we're sort of doing. Bernard, as the proposed frigates are the proposed frigates additional and not replacing anything? They are additional. That's the interesting thing. The Type 31s are an extra. Type 32s are an extra batch of frigates, apparently. So I wouldn't be surprised if there are another 5 batch after the Type 31s. Yes, because a lot of heat is wasted in most turbines, it seems to me. They use the same principle in power plants and blast furnaces. But here it's purely the hot air, not the motion generation. They suck everything out of the turbine in a ship. New IKB 472. I take it that the Pick of H was worried he was not using the original engines. I don't think so, no. As far as I know, I don't think they were. Jeffy, preserving ships always comes down to money. Sad that USS Enterprise was scrapped and USS Texas was saved, but that was where the money was. Yep. CIA, your thoughts on the massive new naval budget that just announced? It's not a new naval budget; it's a defense budget, and they've added on 16.5 billion or 14 billion, depending on your perspective on it, to know the next 4 years. That's a lot of money to be put into things, and basically, it's the British government's first round of we've got to boost the economy post-COVID to get it working, so we've got to start doing things and ordering things. And if you're ordering the Type 32s and you're trying to build them at the same time, that means you might be able to get them in a second, another yard. It's interesting going to be is that can they recruit the personnel to man the ships? And that's going to be the big thing. It's going to make crew retention and recruitment even more critical. Vision, curious of what a war between the USA and Spain have been like if Virginia Affair had gone hot in 1873-4. USA not in good a position unless it captured Spanish ironclad on the repair in Brooklyn Yard. Well, that would help. They'd have probably been okay. Again, Spain is at the other end of the how do I put it? In any war versus Spain versus America, Spain has the problem of being at the other end of the infrastructure line and having a lot more problematic economy at that point. Carmen, I personally like to see a ship in Pembrokeshire, as we built a lot of ships, but we're very rural. Could be quite fun to have a ship there. Vision, Virginia's affair, of course, involved Britain and thus the RN. Most affairs around the world tend to involve the British at some point. Singapore is into drones. They are doing some very interesting things. HMS Ford, hello. Touring HMS Warrior is great because you can tour at your own pace. That is definitely true, and I have taken, I think once I took 200 students aboard HMS Warrior, and they basically saw us coming, and I had a very nice gentleman walk out to us and go, "Are you all coming aboard?" Yes. He said, "Right then, when you're aboard, we'll shut down the ship and we'll say no more visitors till you guys are off, because, space and getting you lot through is going to be interesting." And they basically allowed me to take over the ship for an hour and a half with 200 visitors aboard. 200 students, 3 members of staff, fun times. University students, not school students. So they're a little bit older, but I still had to get 2 of them out the rigging. Don't ask. Do not ask. A gas turbine is a jet engine, basically. The exhaust gas expands and turns a hot turbine, which is geared to be a compressor, which sucks in air and compresses air for fuel. Tom Fanel, Vietnam is the only country that can say it beat the Chinese in open battle like 20 to 30 times over the centuries. Yeah, they are fairly scary navy. Jeffy, might the mysterious Type 32 frigate really be the UK's MCM replacement or a Type 45 replacement? Not the Type 45 replacement. We know that one because its timeline doesn't fit. And the Type 32, not the MCM replacement. I'm doubtful of being the MCM replacement because that's another ship. And if you look at that, they're already talking about their. Also included in design is a mention, or in the announcement is a mention of a maritime research oceanography vessel to replace HMS Scott, which could potentially be turned into a class of ship. So I expect it's more likely the Scott replacement will turn into the MCM replacements as well. Garment, wait, the RN is getting more ships than promised. Yes, they're talking about upping to 24 escorts. 5 Type 31s, 5 Type 32s, which will be a variation of Type 31s. So that's sort of 10 ships from that class. 8 Type 26s and 6 Type 45s. So that'll be 24 escorts. Jack, book cover photos using it's a business on its own. I've heard that about photographers that book cover photos for all that historic romance are a main part of the portfolio. Grace Elsie, many power plants and ships are co-gas, combined gas and steam. The exhaust heat is used to generate steam, which can then be used as a secondary turbine or for other systems. Yeah. Steph Thompson, yes, I do like the reworked R class. Gar Harmon, the RN is NATO's ASW specialist and one of the AA specialists, and with new gear class, they must have destroyers. Yeah. Plus, I think it's also about being forward presence around the world. I think the Type 31s as I've been going on about this for years, but if you want a forward presence ships, you need to have more of them so you can keep your warfighting reserve ready to surge. So I see this as more a case of them pushing people off. Carmen, I see them recruiting off people laid off, possibly. Ben Laura, well, I for one am nearly at my fitness target to put my application in for the RN. Yeah, I need to work on my belly. COVID, lockdown weight. Put on about. It's kind of interesting because I need to spend more time on my bike. Vision. Warship International seems to have worked itself into a panic about the defense review. I'm always a few months behind in issues on news end. Was the panic overblown about Johnson government? I think the panic was a misunderstanding of the Johnson government. I think the idea was that the Johnson government would be even firmer on the cuts and all these things, but I think they forget one thing about the Johnson government, which I've been noticing, is that they are really serious about two things that comes in because they want to secure long-term support in those areas they won off Labour last election, and one of them is what they're calling levelling up areas of north, etc. And if you look at those areas, the places with the things which the government has the most control over in the UK in terms of building, construction, and factory jobs is defence. I.e., which shipyards they award naval contracts to, which factories, and where they build armored vehicles for the army, etc. Those things are useful, and so I think that's what they're doing. Basically, they're using defence to shore up the economy. Jerk, that sounded more like a boarding action tour. It felt like more like a boarding action than a tour. CIA, you said don't ask, so I will ask. How did the students get stuck in the rigging? I don't want this to become a patron topic, but basically, I was explaining something to one group of students on the stern of the ship, looking over there, talking about it, and the other teachers were downstairs, and the people aboard from the ship, from the HMS Warrior Society, were also downstairs, down inside the hull, and suddenly noticed that I quickly noticed that the eyes of the students who I was talking to had stopped tracking me and were tracking something behind me. So I turned around, and there was a couple of students who had a bright spark of taking a really good selfie photo, and they got stuck in the rigging and weren't able to get down. So Muggins ended up having to climb up the rigging and talk them down, basically. And luckily, we all got down before anyone from HMS Warrior turned up to tell us off and tell us we could never come again. And the next year when we went, I basically told two members of staff, because we had 5 the next year, the same number of students, and I basically had 2 members of staff, and I went, You will say go that end beneath that set of rigging. You will stand that end beneath that set of rigging. Told them what had happened and made sure it didn't happen again. So yeah, fun times. On day's job for a lecturer. On day's job. Dan, I know what I was like as a university student versus school people. Way more likely to try steal war and take over life piracy as a university student. Positive. Different. We can sail warrior across the Atlantic and acquire Haida for you. That'll be fun. Gahan, why does someone change in heart? Do you think they finally realized that the RN is too small? To an extent, potentially realized the RN is too small, but also realized that for current threats, you need to have a forward presence. And how do you want to do that forward presence? Is usually naval is probably the safest way for Britain. South Thompson, look like presence equals river on roids? No. Well, you can use. You see, the thing is, I consider the river class to be a very good sloop, and I wouldn't be surprised if the next thing you see eventually, possibly in next years, is more river class being procured as well. But I see the sort of the Type 31s being procured and Type 32s as being your sort of light cruisers going around the world, being your forward present ships going, hello, we're here, we've got a British flag, we're quite powerful. And then your river class would be your sloops, that would be your force multipliers if you want to deploy Mera. Calm adjustment. ASW begins to be inseparable from NTA as dinky 400-ton Wiesel sub can lob 4 exocets into your face, even from 20 kilometers. They do make it fun. Beware of VPLO get through Big C. I've heard that. Carmen, I wish they would build something in West Wales where there's not much employment if you don't want oil. That would be quite good. Melanie, I'm scared of heights, but I'm going to climb way up here. Basically, what they'd done is they weren't normally scared of heights, but when they got into rigging, they suddenly realized that on the rigging, you are on a net floating above midair and it's waving in the wind and it's moving. It all looks very strong and stable until you put some weight on it and it starts to move. And they're going, ah! And I'm going, ugh. And also, when they sort of look at me going, why are you climbing? Because I, of course, studied it over years and know how you're supposed to climb rigging and all the things. And yeah, it was interesting. Blind High, sorry, did they at least get the photo, lol? Yes. Actually, part of me talking down was I took the photo for them. Roland Cash, keep those students away from all the muskets with bayonets on, worried Dr. Locke. We won't go into that one. We will not go into that one. That was another problem. Paul Riscard, so in regards to Trent Affair and boarding another ship, when did the RN Leopard change its spots a matter? No, the RN always were happy to do it. It's just they weren't happy to do other people. And also, again, you have to remember that with HMS Liverpool, as I said, there are other conventions which have gone through, but the Asama Maru is not a Japanese mail ship. Okay, it's not carrying the diplomatic pouches. So the point is, if it had been a regular British merchant sailor, a merchant sail ship, that would have been problematic, but it could have been dealt with. If the Americans had conducted her into a prize court, that could have been dealt with. It's issues, but problem. But because of the way they did it, and because it was a Royal Mail steamer, that was the problem. It's context is king as always. Paul Freon just got out of meeting. This is a great presentation. Thank you. Can we donate to the RN on YouTube for more ships? I don't think you can officially. Unofficially, you can donate to the RN for Iron Brew. I'm fairly sure they will take any drinks being sent to them. Usually just have them delivered to their nearest naval Royal Navy base. They're always happy to see them. Carl Harmon saw people mocking government priority on Navy. Me, if Britain needs anything, needs army, something's gone very, very wrong. That's basically there are people who will mock the government no matter what decision they make, and then will think about it later and go, let's put it this way. Even a busted clock is right twice a day. Even a government which you disagree with can do things which are right. I find it annoying whenever on politics or history where people are presuming because they disagree with that person that everything they do is wrong. Classic example is Margaret Thatcher, who actually does some very, very good political things, but because of some issues perceived by one side, and so there are some other issues in communication and handling, there is a perception, and it's the wrong one. In that, look through actually what she achieved, and you suddenly realize there is a reason she wins so many elections. If you read some of the popular history books, she is considered to be this person who is hated by everyone, all these things, and you go look and go, she wins these massive majorities. If she was so hated, why does she keep winning? Why does she get seats which vote for her but haven't voted for Conservative on other occasions until Boris Johnson's come up with the recent election? What is the difference? What is the difference in between her message and his message? And you have to be very careful. You can get into very lazy thinking. Just everything they do is bad and everything we do is good. It's never the case. So always be very careful. Whenever a government makes an announcement, there are going to be lots of people say it's bad automatically without even reading it. Go and read it first. There are things in the government announcement which I actually disagree with. And actually, I am very happy to be getting the money we're getting. I could quite happily spend a little bit more, but I'm happy with what we're getting. With the Type 32s, I find it an interesting idea. I'm very happy to be hearing about those. I think it's going to be, as I understand, it's going to be an evolution of the Type 31, which sounds perfect to me, as long as it's a sensible, within cost-effective range evolution of the Type 31s. And as I said, I would have liked added on a few more River class, but I'd also like us to make a decision about the army. Are we going to be a heavy army, or are we going to be a medium army, or are we going to keep confusing ourselves? Because I think if the British Army, on the size it is at the moment, keeps trying to be everything, it's going to get into trouble. The Royal Navy has, to an extent, can afford to be everything, but that's to an extent because of the escorts it has. And even it can't be everything, because if you think about it, it's gone for, we have enough air defense ships for being able to mount 1 to 2 task groups. We have 2 carriers, we have an amphibious group, all these things. They have very much pared them down. But it's our anti-submarine and our frigate strength, which is going to be, so it's going to be forward presence, it's going to be anti-submarine warfare, which are going to be our strong areas. So you can see these things. And we aren't, one of the things I have noticed is they haven't put an increase in sub numbers, because those are very expensive and far more difficult to justify. And also far more difficult to do, as frankly, our yard is at peak capacity and we have 1 yard. Bitchon, we don't want to fight, but just in case we do, we got the ships, we got the men, and we got the money too. That was a good song. Ben Laura, we need more public subscription for battleships. That'd be fun. Did they at least sing What Do We Do with the Drunken Sailor? I mean, no, they didn't. Calderon, hello. So, how are you supposed to climb rigging? Okay, so in the movies, you always see them going up the center of rigging like that up the middle. Okay? Sensible person, especially if they're climbing rigging which is moving in the wind, will climb up the side. And like that. Because you actually have more movement and you can hold yourself in better. So instead of like that, like that. Death Squad. How many students that you have taken on visit have then had to return via medical facility? None so far, but several have tried to return via a medical facility. New AKB 4472, Dan Freeman, are you saying that the students under your charge attempted to engage in horizontal jogging on the holy stone? Oh God, please tell me no. Shama, you folks in the UK could start a public subscription campaign for ships. We should do. And I have run out of Iron Brew, so I would like you to all know I'm carrying on even though I've run out of Iron Brew. I consider this very good public service at the moment. Thank you. If I were you, I'd be concerned about the SA revolvers in the armory, not the photos on the rigging. Luckily, we had a teacher, we had a lecturer on that, Judy. Carl, do you think this might be the first defense review which increased spending, not less? It could well be. Shimak, you either need to start procuring a new tank or accept you are buying Leos from Germans for a while. I have a feeling that in the end we're just not going to have tanks. I have a feeling we'll go, we'll do modify Ajax. We'll go for a sort of CV90 version of the Ajax thing, i.e., one hull having it all, and Boxer. I think we'll go down to a 2-unit system, but I have those are the production runs we currently have going. Shulmac, though, as procuring Leos would be completely politically in the UK, procuring a German tank, as sensible as it might be, would be politically impossible. We're more likely to procure an American tank. Type 32 is an evolution of the Type 31. Carl Harmon. Sanron. And the best part of the defense spending is Twitter spouting nonsense about bombing children rather than feeding them, plus nurses pay act, as if the NHS isn't a budget monster. I wouldn't describe the NHS as a budget monster, but it does get a huge amount of the British budget. And for what it does, yes, it's expected to pick up a huge amount of our problems. I am often worried about some of the management of the NHS. I'm not worried about the doctors or the nurses. I think they do, as a whole, do a very, very good job. I do worry about some of the layers and levels of management of the NHS, and I do sometimes wonder, I think it has turned in sections more into a government bureaucracy than a medical service, but that's for someone who's far more specialist than me to do examine properly. I'm fairly sure the Type 32's role will be as same as the Type 31's. I'm fairly sure. I think they'll probably be slightly evolved in that I'm reckoning what they will probably be doing is the Type 31's will be one level of technology, and the Type 32's will probably be take their technology level a little bit further, have a little bit more added on, a little bit more equipment or a little bit more thing. Once you've got the hull and production line going, so basically, I see them as being probably sharing about 80 to 90% commonality between 32 and 31, probably, if that's likelihood, so that they can be nice and cheap. So they'll be very nice and cheap. So anything you add on is something which you're doing, and development of the initial thing. But no one's really announced much details yet. Vision, hopefully, Messrs. Johnson and Biden will have bond over their love of high-speed trains. So you basically hug it to hold on if necessary. Something you can't do in the middle. Pretty much. Is the Challenger 2 too expensive? As far as I'm aware, it's one of the best VMT. It's not too expensive. It's the fact we need to upgrade it. So we either need to upgrade to the Challenger 3 standard, and finally actually do it, and instead of just keep talking about it, or we need to work out things. Nick Ashwell Rice. They rejected Ajax as a direct fire vehicle. Block 2 and 3 Ajax will not be ordered. Most likely, the line will switch to Moag Eagle for MRVP. Potentially. But there again, they are changing all sorts of things. And the fact is, the army is the one which is been holding up the integrated review. The Navy, the Air Force, the Foreign Office, the Special Forces, and the intelligence services, I think, have all been accepted and worked out and agreed. It's the army's one which is currently causing the trouble in holding up the integrated review. Manly 1640. Why would German tanks be impossible? Basically, World War II and British memory of it. The political and cultural memory. Schumach, are you crossing your fingers for Mark 58 VLS? I am not going to comment on that one. Take care, Paul from Chicago. Nick Aswell, Type 32 could easily mount S8 1850 for ABM picket duties. There are all sorts of options which could be done, and it's going to be the same. It's interesting that it's going to be a Type 31 which has been evolved. So, it's not saying that SNHS shouldn't be funded, but just fed up with the immediate sort of pearl clutching there is whenever defence funding is proposed. I know, I find that a bit. You need to be able to do both. I'm sorry if you can't do both, then you turn into Norway or Denmark in the beginning in World War II. Carmen, would Type 32 have a fleet role? Also, what's going on being a Gulf? What do you think? Well, okay, so I will keep going for till about 8:45, I think, because I am starting to lose my voice. So that's another 8 minutes by me. I will say the role of the as we were talking about, and as I was talking about in this week's bilge pumps, the role of the Type 31 and the Type 32. The Type 31, as I said, is the point defense ship. She has got all the cannon, she's got all the guns. Basically, she is the flak defense ship of your carrier or your amphibious ships in a battle group. She's the inner ring. I wouldn't be surprised if the Type 32 supplements that. Honestly, they're going to be a forward present ship with a lot of firepower. I wouldn't be surprised if they keep the same gun mounts as Type 31. I think it's possibly a radar and possibly a VLS change, because that's the easiest thing to fit in the same boxes, and it's not going to cost that much to upgrade. What would Wilkes' memory of his career been without the Trent Affair? He was the most famous living USN officer at one point. Probably he'd be remembered quite well, but I could see him still getting into the same trouble which caused him to be kicked out of the Navy and put as a Rear Admiral on the retired list, not a Rear Admiral in service. Nick Aswell Rice, I do wonder if the review is realizing the US is pivoting to the Pacific and it's up to us to prevent a Russian breakthrough through the GIUK. Potentially. So again, the Type 32s might be a Type 31 with a towed array sonar. Manly 6040. More great decisions by politicians old enough to have been alive during the Second World War. No, we don't want the best tanks in the world. Welcome to the world of politics. And honestly, if you're going to buy the best tank in the world, I agree the Leopard's very good, and I do like the Leo, but honestly, I'd be tempted to buy the Merkava. For British tactics. Because British tactics tend to favour armour and firepower over speed. So that's why the Challenger is slightly slower, but is far more better armoured than the Abrahams and the Leo. So that is why I would go for, if you're going for British tactics, Merkava. Burnstick, Shomack. Ooh, didn't look at a rifle gun. That kind of explains it. Would surprise me, though, if the Brits buy tanks and not make a Challenger 3 or something like that. That'd be more likely if they decide to make tanks and to keep them. Anonymous, expect RN to increase deployments to Singapore. Not as new east of Suez, but FONOPS, for example. I wouldn't be surprised if you end up with a similar scenario in Singapore as we've got in Bahrain, i.e. you have a forward-based Type 31. And with them now building 5 Type 32s, I wouldn't be surprised if you end up with maybe a couple of Type 31s forward-based in the Gulf and a couple of Type 32s forward-based in Singapore. That might well be the difference. A Type 32 might be orientated on a Pacific deployment, Type 31 on a Gulf deployment, and the rest back in the UK to do forward transitioning and maintenance and all these things. Take on the Falklands Islands, the standing frigate in South Atlantic, and the Caribbean patrol, possibly. What are other examples of zealous naval captains getting their nations into trouble? Sir Sidney Smith on a regular basis. Getting into trouble with his own government, not known foreign governments. Cameron, ever seen a Merkava snorkeling? Arctic conditions? But the thing is, again, with Arctic conditions, the British don't expect to really deploy tanks up there. They expect that the Ajax might get up there to support Royal Marines' 3rd Commander Brigade if they have a 3rd Commander Brigade going into Norway, but not the Challenger tank, because, again, they think it's too heavy for those roads to be useful. Carmen, Type 32 task group lead in Gulf when only small boats there? No, it'd be the Type 31. That's what it's being deployed for. I think Merkava means chariot, so the name is already fits British tradition. Yeah. Measurement. Some nations, including nations with big militaries, still using upgraded patterns. Does the British Army need new tanks when they could upgrade or even place in reserve what they have? Again, this is the thing. As I said in my own video on the subject, I think the reserves is an underutilized service for Britain in that you could place a lot of good equipment in the reserves and stick it as a reservist thing that you can call up when you need, rather than keep obsessing with can we afford to maintain it in the regular force. So yeah, as a Singaporean military personnel, I've never actually seen the British ever deploy to Singapore. Has an RN ship actually been there in years? Yes, they have. RN ships have deployed to Singapore quite recently, and the RN maintain a base in Singapore. We maintain an actual basing facility, again, like Bahrain. It's been upgraded recently and has more personnel there. So we do have a forward operating base. We already have the base in Bahrain. We just don't have the ship's base there for it. Shomak, if you don't want German tanks, the British are left with US. You don't want M1 turbine, and well, then you're left with something built around someone else's requirements very specifically. Yeah. 900. UK will most likely simply upgrade Challenger 2. They are perfect adequate for British Army needs. They'd most likely be outside Europe. Hopefully, any extra defense money mostly goes to the RN. I hope it's. I think the RN needs money first, but I think the others will need money as one time. Anyway. It is now 8:45. As said, I ran out of liquid a while ago, and my voice is starting to go. And I have another live tomorrow for you lovely people on the Battle of Quiberon Bay, as well as to record Bill Trumps. So I'm going to husband my voice very carefully, and I'm going to say thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for the super chats. I will answer the last few questions before I go, but thank you to everyone who's liked this. Thank you to everyone who's subscribed. Thank you to everyone who's joined us in Discord or Patreon, all these things. And I hope you've enjoyed this. Right then. So, Nick Ashwell, it has been announced if we go 130mm, it'll be made here. We need to buy it. That'd be good. And us, countries with their own industrial base always want to be able to produce tanks. Yes, they do, but they can't. Not all can. Vision, I got to climb around and following the children falling out of the hatch at the bottom of the pattern tank in the Railway Museum. Pretty cool. Cool. Good night, Ben and Laura. Thank you, Anonymous. Carl's begun. Thank you. 99 Duke. Thank you. Manly 6 point. Wait, the CIA is Singaporean military? Didn't you ever realize that? Azaski. Thanks. Have a nice evening. Thank you. DGV40. Goodbye. John Shea. Have a good day. Thank you. Harmon. Should be. Can we keep them in reserve? They may be moved to Canada. They may be awful. Could be fun to have them based in reserve America in Canada. Vision. Good evening. Grace Elsie. Thank you. Dan Freeman. Thank you. Yogi Khan. Thank you. Shomak. If they upgrade the Charlie properly, aid and the Elnor 70, a new arm piercing package and 2,000 horsepower, it'll work, but they can't do halfway at this point. No, they can't. Tell me, guys, Stanflex Type 32-1? I don't think so. I'd be tempted to actually think that a Type 32 might be a 4.5-inch gun instead of the 57mm and an upgraded radar, but I don't know. We'll see what happens. Maybe it'll be a 76mm instead of 57mm. Who knows? Take care, everyone, and thank you very much. Take care, Burn Stick. Thank you, everyone, and take care. Bye. Thank you. Thank you, Stuart Quinn.